Hi, I'm Kimberly Williams, and I am so excited to be to just be part of beginning this healing reading, this Atelier healing reading that is part of Poetry on the Move. The anthology itself has been created, and we're doing this recording. We'll be putting it in the Poetry on the Move website, and I think in this time of uncertainty, the idea of thinking about poetry and healing is just an incredibly powerful combination. And the festival this year, which face-to-face, COVID willing, will be in October, our theme is archive, and so what we'll be doing is we'll be archiving this experience, right? We'll be recording it, we'll be showing it, having it on our website, and then we'll have it in the archives as well as something to preserve. So we're just so incredibly excited how international this is, because that really is our goal. The Poetry on the Move goal is to be as expansive and inclusive as we possibly can in the events and the offerings. So I'd just like to give a formal welcome for Poetry on the Move, and I would very much like to specifically thank Des and Eric for really helping to bring this together. It was completely Des's idea, combination with Eric, and we're so grateful that you were able to coordinate all this and do this to be part of the festival.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. Kimberly's been so helpful. So Eric and I are the co-editors of this wonderful anthology. Eric, you want to tell us a bit about?
Yes, of course, it's going to be my pleasure. It's wonderful to be here at the Poetry on the Move festival. And so this Atelier of Healing Poetry about Trauma and Recovery website has been on for about 2 years. And we're glad to be doing this because it feels an urgent need for people to overcome their psychological wounds. And our readers tonight will be using various techniques to communicate some of these traumatic events. They'll be using imagery, storytelling, plenty of repetition in some cases, and they cover a whole range of subject matter, from current events to personal tragedies to the COVID-19 pandemic that we're still very much a part of. And so Des and I are glad to provide this platform for everybody to have to experience acceptance of whatever existential condition they are in. Right. And Des can tell us more about the website.
Okay, thank you so much, Eric. Eric's always a wonderful editor to work with on these projects. But here I'm sharing screen what the web e-anthology, the online anthology looks like. It's a labor of love. And we've got 10 fantastic, absolutely eminent writers here to read and share their work. And we're going to introduce each of them as we move along the event, right? But here is a sense of what the website looks like. There are 8 chapters in all, and you can see that, there's this big sort of blue motif that threads right through all the chapters. That's just an aesthetic that we went with. And it's just such an amazing crop of submissions that we had that dealt with everything, every kind of issue, from gender to illness to grief of a lost one, death, being a survivor of cancer, mental illness, esteem, bullying in school, just so diverse. And somehow they all fell into these 8 chapters very neatly. I don't know how it all happened, but it was just amazing. Okay, so very quickly, I'm just going to show you that we have over 100 contributors from all over the world. And in another event for Poetry Festival Singapore, we had some UK readers, Canadian readers, US readers read for that. And here we have fabulous readers who who are all part of this anthology. We would like to thank very quickly a couple of organizations that have helped us so much. Poetry Festival Singapore, Eric Valles is one of the co-directors. They have given us a space for the Singapore launch, and Canberra, University of Canberra's Poetry on the Move. Thank you so much to Kimberly and Samuel for giving us the overseas launch. And then NTU is also giving us a reading, and all these organizations like the Arts House, the National Library Board, the Singapore Book Council, and Singlet Station over the years have actually allowed us to do workshops and talks on poetry as a very powerful way of healing for writers and for readers. And so we're very thankful to all these organizations, right? So very quickly, we are going to start with our very first reader, and that is Kit.
Right. And it'll be my pleasure to introduce Kit, who is a collaborator at Poetry Festival Singapore. He is an educator and writer who has edited poetry anthologies such as From Walden to Woodlands and Love at the Gallery. He holds a master's degree in English literature from the University College London. His writings have been featured in QLRS, Interreligious Insight, and elsewhere. In 2019, he was a recipient of the Outstanding Youth in Education Award by the Ministry of Education. And he is also the unofficial poet laureate of the Ministry of Education. He always recites poetry for the minister and other officials. Okay, Kit, take it away.
Thank you, Eric and Desmond. And thank you, everyone. I must, however, concede that I've just been invited to a few Ministry of Education events at which I've been honored to speak. So I don't think we quite have any kind of official or unofficial poet laureate position, but nevertheless, I'm just glad that poetry is in the public eye, and all the good work that Poetry Festival is doing, none other than Eric is leading. It's really helping to bring poetry to the forefront, which we need more so now than ever, I'd say, during this time of crisis. So I'd like to share these two poems that have been featured in the anthology, and just a bit of context about these. Right, the first one, Bottled, was written in the context of the Little India riots in Singapore. So this was actually back from years ago, in which, of course, any kind of disturbances are really rare in Singapore. But that's not to say that they don't happen. And I think it's really important to confront these and face up to, violence, actually, and what it entails for us. So really just to share this, right? First poem, Bottled, right? Bottled. A sudden crash, a man dies. Manic activity ensues. Under the police headlamps remains the aftermath. Deformed plastic, burning rubber, broken windshields, blazing metal effigies, the acrid smoke wafting past, the grisly geometry of blood in congealed wounds. Clamorous sirens have smothered the howls of the mob. The slow peace of decades blighted by their cacophony. As estimated, damages have been incurred, property lost. Justice is assured. Prosecution, incarceration, deportation. Men lie, flat on their fronts, cuffed, subdued, a neat line. A suspect looks up. Can we sense his unregenerate fury in the bottles that he hurled, or hear the mangled words that he conceals with his silent mouthings when we drove him into the chafed margins of this still safe land? So that's Bottled, there's quite a bit written as well in the wake of this, both in academia and in terms of creative writing. But I think there's a lot more to unpack actually from there. Right, and this second piece was written when I left the school I taught at. Now I'm at, well, Ministry of Education headquarters, but previously I was teaching for 5 years at a school, right, at the secondary level. And I know this anthology is, of course, about trauma, right, and the process of healing, but there's also something about loss. And I think that it's something that is about the intangible aspects that that's arrayed on the inarticulate, right, as T.S. Eliot would put it. So just thinking about that as well, with this piece, when the school is quiet, the world is an open sky. A yawning afternoon sun prods me to bid goodbye. Slowly, I dismantle the years to be wrapped and packed. Every fatigued box is heavy with the weight of words. Laden with promises heaved out of drawers. When the school is quiet, the world is an open sky. Laughter and chatter always scatter like birds. Faint knocking. Is someone at the glass doors? I peer out. The corridor is empty. Intrigued by absence, I wander outside, flummoxed at how quickly others can elude us. But then I hear the piano gently playing, as if to serenade the stillness of twilight. My interest now peaked. The tune is from that film we watched, Your Name. I descend the stairs to the first floor, only to find no one. Strange silence. It is always the same. Of course, we are only temporary. Ideals fade. Though my gaze lingers, I know I must depart, whether into the moss-green hills on the wall or just to a new desk. Still, images echo behind. Sacks of rice, mooncakes, lanterns of the heart. I trudge back up. There is a card on my table. I read the balm of your farewell, a loving scrawl. Outside, the pale light wanes with the coals call. But there will always be words, a heart's cradle. All right, so thank you, everyone. And
Thanks to Wycliffe.
just
Those are very lovely poems.
Thank you.
And poetry is there for a lot of reasons, and some of it can record historical events or milestones. In the first poem, you are talking about the Little India riots, which were quite memorable a few years back. But as an educator, is there also a salutary purpose to your writing about such incidents?
Yeah, I think there's a kind of memorialization at work, right? And it's important because I'm just thinking even about the students that who I taught. And I mean, for some of the younger ones, they have no memory of this, obviously, because they were too young to remember, right? Oh, and it's not just the Little India riots, it's just about every historical event. And I remember, thinking to myself, there was once where I was teaching and I was just mentioning September 11th. And then they were like, what's that? And I realized they've been born after September 11th. They all were, right? So, it was, well, unnerving, mind-numbing almost, right? Like to realize that we live in different epochs of sorts, right? And there's something about verse that captures, that memorializes, that inscribes, right? So I think it's important that we respond in verse to the great meta-narratives around us, but not merely so. And it shouldn't just be limited to these kinds of greater events with great men, etc. Right? No, I mean it's also about the little stories. It's also about the untold stories. It's about the vulnerable. It's about those whose stories are unheard. I think that's really crucial as well, and that's something I'm trying to get at here, right? And it's a bit sensitive, of course, now when we speak about race and ethnicity and so on, right? But I think we really need to look at how, for example, certain groups have been treated, right, historically, and that I think students as well need to take a close, hard look at what's been done before, so that we can shape attitudes, right, in the future, right? I mean, I remember, meeting, parents of students and so on who had, well, let's just say not the most tolerant attitudes towards certain groups of migrant workers, for example.
Yes, and you wrote this. Did you write this immediately after the riots?
This was almost immediately
Okay.
after. Yeah, but I mean, I think that I needed time for it to simmer as well.
And the sentiments still hold true
In some
in
ways,
2021.
tragically, right?
And
Yeah.
the soul searching that you're encouraging us in this poem, like it's something that we should all be doing at this moment. But yeah, so Wyke's poems illustrate like the breadth of the poetry that we have on the Atelier of Poetry website. So it covers big issues that affect the entire community, as well as personal struggles. And the second one seems very personal, and it seems memorialization of someone who is gone from your life, but not completely, because although you were parted in real life, you are still together in verse in this particular work. And so for you, the world is always an open sky. Would you like to comment on that, Wyke?
Yeah, briefly perhaps. Yes, I think you put it well that when we think of absences, right? I mean, and when we think of physical and psychological spaces, sometimes we don't know what we're talking about, right? And this happened to describe an actual incident in which I remember I tend to stay till late on campus, right? Because, well, there's just that much work, right? But I remember just hearing the tune from that the film that's described here, Kimi no Nawa, right, meaning your name, right? It's the Japanese anime film, and which was very strange because like it seemed to come out from nowhere. And I remember going, walking downstairs and then seeing that, there's absolutely no one. And it's very strange when the school is still and there's no one, because normally, far away, you will hear like children's laughter, you will hear like, someone playing, here and there running around and so on. But it was just absolute stillness. And then the evening light was coming in. It was just surreal. Yeah. And then I really did find the card on my table. So it was almost like, out of nowhere. And I actually wonder, like, what happened sometimes. Yeah, but this is, again, it's also about what truly matters in the end, right? I mean, that when poetry captures that sense of felt absence and also presence, right? That if words remain, then that at least, that emotion recollected in tranquility can never really be taken away.
Mm-hmm.
Why kid? Since you are right there, having taught in schools and now are at the ministry, we know that just recently we've had two really big tragedies happening in schools, and as educators, we know that the youths today are having a lot of stresses, and we see the trauma coming through in their writing. You've done workshops with them. You teach literature. Can you just give us some of the ways in which you run workshops and try to hold their stories, which are so important to them, and help them heal through poetry, through literature, right? Can you give us some tips?
Well, actually, I think you've given all these workshops, and I do believe even to some of my students. I mean, I remember some of them have attended, those at the National Gallery and so on. I remember like they've been talking about it. So yes, I'm not I'm in a position to give, advice or tips or strategies, but what I can say, I suppose, is that it's all about really touching on lived experiences in that sense, right? That, of course, with the recent tragic events, these are events that call for, again, memorialization that we must never forget. Right? And the danger is in the forgetting, that if, days pass and it's as if it never happened, as if a life didn't matter, right? When there's so much that needs to be I hesitate to say process because it's a kind of mechanical sense to that, but there's a sense in which we need to understand and fully live and really experience those emotions, and some of which are very raw and painful. I mean, there's students who have been traumatized actually by what's happened, right? And poetry is not just therefore, some kind of optional extra. It can, in many ways, is a vital means of really inscribing or recording what it means to be alive, right? And it's almost life-saving in that way, if it captures the essence of what it means to be. And I think that's why during workshops, I usually suggest to students to just bring in what they think and feel. I bring in prompts, so pictures can be very helpful, right? Sometimes it's not just about the words, because that's one way, it's a really important way, the verbal, but it's also the visual, right? So I'm reminded of one of your other projects, right? The ekphrasis, projects and all that, right? When we use artworks in that sense to prompt emotional responses. And what I mean, if we think about even just, there's so many images today that I mean, it's almost like we are in an age where imagery is proliferating online and elsewhere, right? And there's so much out there. I think it's all about being very circumspect about the choice of text that we employ, so that we try to find balance, right? That on the one hand, we need to make sure that the prompts are provocative enough to elicit responses, but on the other hand, it mustn't be like overwhelming, for example. So I think that's really important, that for us to maintain that fine balance, and that's why I like to strive to do. Yeah,
you provide very good exemplars there, Waikit, in your poems. They're very vivid verbal icons.
Right, thank you. Yeah, I should mention, since Eric is right. When I see Eric, I think of all the poetry festival work, right? Like, I'm reminded of the Love and Life at the Gallery project, of course. Yeah. So in which just to share briefly that for those of us at Poetry Festival Singapore, we've gathered an anthology of poems about artworks at the National Gallery. So please, at the National Gallery Singapore, I must add. And that's, I remember bringing students to the gallery before, and they've enjoyed it so much when they were there in person. And they were just texting in the class chat group as well, that they miss those visits so much. Because, I mean, obviously it's hard for them to visit now, right? In groups, of course, yeah. So that, again, that all these vital modes of experience, right? Art, and poetry, these are not, luxuries in that sense. These are important for us to understand what it means to be human.
Thank you, Waikit. You're always
Thank you very much, Waikit.
And yes, Love at the Gallery is a fantastic publication. It's a full color. Yeah, that he's holding it up. And inside that, full color images of these heritage paintings with beautiful poems written by, fantastic poets like Prof. Edwin Tambu Pujanansi, Eric Valles. Yeah, there you go. Yeah. You're a fantastic apologist. All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Thanks
much.
to Waikit.
Okay, so I get the honor of introducing the next reader, and it is none other than dear Christy Ng, that I've known for yonks, right? And Christy's very humble in her bio. I'm going to introduce her. She says she's learning to be a writer, and all of us writers understand that to be a condition of our practice. She once told Simon Armitage a joke which he laughed at politely. Her poems have been published in Quarterly Literary Review Singapore and The Kindling. She doesn't want me to say, but she's actually, helming a very important organization that does nationwide work here, but I'm not allowed to say. So she's just at the forefront of language, okay? So Christy, it's all yours.
Hi everyone, thank you for having me. So I have two poems to read today. I wrote these two poems about 2 years ago. when I was still in school. I was writing a short collection of poems, and for some reason, all of them had to do with death. I wasn't thinking about death, but somehow it was a consistent theme. So I'll just share my poems first, and after that, I can talk a bit more about them. Conversations with the man in the box. I tell him, this is where you live now. And for 3 days only, this holds true. And for 3 days, I play with semantics, so I get to reverse this troublesome reality bookended between Friday and Monday. And for 3 days, I allow myself this trickery of language because real life is suddenly so boring. I tell him again, this is where you live now. And the man in the box, he doesn't respond, doesn't acknowledge me, but I play along anyway. I tell him, that's a nice corner to hang your Hockney painting. And I ask, how are we going to fit all your shoes and clothes in here? Like we're both characters in a self-aware play, and this is an incredulous punchline where the audience absolutely loses it. And I imagine the man in the box telling me, well, darling, I wouldn't need them since I'm dead. And we laugh, and the audience laughs, and the critics, they laugh, and the lights dim, and the show ends. And again, I tell him, this is where you live now. After the well-wishers, and the weepers, and the non-believers flee like it's contagious. There are Kleenex carnations transforming the empty tables into graves. Because no one likes to carry grief home in their pockets. And all I'm left with is a man in a box and the impossibility of words. I tap the handsome walnut furnishing and tell him, this is where you live now. And somehow it is enough. So I'll talk a bit more about the first poem first. I wrote this loosely based on experiences attending funerals and wakes. And I realized that when someone you love passes on, you don't really get time to properly grieve and sit with your sadness. You have to think about all the funeral proceedings and all the planning. And I wrote this poem because it feels like sometimes, even though the funeral planning can be very methodical, it can help to start your processing of the grief. And in this poem, there's this, the narrator, she's having a really quiet moment with a loved one. Sometimes there's nothing else you can say to make the situation better. Sometimes you just want more time and spend more time with the person you love. And I think that's enough to help you process your grief. Okay, I'll move on to the next poem, Kew Garden Spring. Kew Garden Spring. We are sitting in this god-awful weather under the arm of a magnolia tree, dusting raindrops from her sleeve, the rest of London insignificant. In 3 hours, we sprint home in the rain, blood soaking through our coats. In 2.5, the paramedics will have arrived and be speaking to the cops. In an hour, Joe from Ealing will tell us that his speech is funny. The skin on his fingers like drenched petals, crumpled and soft, and we try not to look at where the side of his head meets the curb, the blood blooming and bright. In half an hour, we see a man and a car drawn towards each other, slicing a straight line through the street. In the seconds before that, we wait for the bus taking us home, with your arm crooked in mine. I look down and you present me with a sakura, like an open palm waiting. We found it on the bench where we sat. I did not see. Okay, so this second poem is actually based on the experience I had in London. So it was my birthday. I went to Kew Gardens with some of my friends. It was spring, it was really cold. And when we were leaving Kew Gardens, we witnessed this, I wouldn't say horrific, but it was rather violent accident. So there was this elderly couple who were, they were crossing the street, and then a vehicle collided into them. And we all like now looking back, it almost felt like we were watching it in slow motion. And I remember bits and pieces of what happened. And it was kind of gruesome. There was blood everywhere. I think bits of flesh as well. And I remember holding on to the hand of the man lying on the road, and his skin, and all I could think of was how his skin felt so soft. And it was just so strange because even when in the face of traumatic events, these are the things that I remember that stay with me. And I wrote this poem trying to process what happened on that day. And I was trying to talk about how I can remember both the lovely things that happened and also the terrible things that happened, and how both terrifying things can be beautiful. And hopefully and in the end the ambulance came and they brought the elderly couple to the hospital, and hopefully they're okay. I don't know how they are, but I hope they're okay.
Wow. Thank you so much, Christy. These are fabulous poems, and I remember reading them and thinking, you know, that it's just, the craft is just amazing. Can you share with us a bit about how you move from an incident of trauma and then use such amazing craft to talk about it through different angles? You know, sometimes it's almost surrealist. Sometimes you know, it's clearly a prose poem. A narrative lyric poem. So just tell us a bit about how your mind works as a writer and how those emotions and thoughts become all these, you know, stunning lines, right?
I think for the first poem, when I write, I tend to write a lot of run-on sentences. So you might notice that I use a lot of long lines. It feels very natural to me. So when I was writing this, I was imagining how a person who has lost someone they love would come out with all these absurd and surreal scenarios where they're still having this quiet final moments with the person they love, and they're focusing on all the mundane things, like how this funeral is going to take place over the weekend, and then they have to go back to work the next day. When they're focusing on the fact that it almost feels very theatrical. That there are two characters talking to each other, but the other person in the box isn't responding at all. So they're focusing on all these moments to sort of maybe distract or even process their own grief. And at the end, and in the last stanza, the reality kind of hits them when they realize that, okay, people are leaving now. This is the new reality for me. I have lost someone I loved, and I have to cope with that. And I tried to express all of it. I tried to express all of it. Sorry, I'm just kind of lost for words thinking about.
It's fine. I mean, the storytelling quality is just amazing, and I want to spring another one on you. You shared with me a few weeks ago that you've actually got a children's book project that is underway, right? And I can see how this translates nicely into like a picture book manuscript. Can you tell us a bit about that project, if you're willing to share? How exciting!
Sure.
Yeah?
It's about a lizard. I know we don't really like lizards. We have lizards at home all the time. So it's about this lizard who wants to watch the sunset.
Yeah.
And so this lizard is crawling up the HDB, and she meets all sorts of characters along the way. Different animals like moths, house pets, as she goes up to the roof. And finally, she sees the sunset. So yeah, that's my children's book idea.
That's fantastic. That's a fantastic, and I like it that the lizard's a she already. Okay, Eric, do you have any questions for Christy, dear Christy?
Yeah, I was just thinking about what she said about the theatricality of trauma.
Yeah,
and that's what some theorists also maintain. And in your conversations with the man in the box, you have a whole dialogue there between the persona and the man in the box. I don't know if this is one way by which you as a writer deals with death. As you say, you tend to write about this very difficult subject matter.
It comes up. I don't know why, but it comes up.
And and this is rather ingenious because we don't have too many poems about death in which there is dialogue, and then you have it there in conversations with the man in the box.
Yeah. Yeah.
Was this difficult to write, Christy?
Um, I think the process of it kind of made me sad thinking about it.
Yes, of course.
Imagining, yeah, imagining if it ever happened to me. But I think this is also really important about the aftermath or what happens when when the funeral ends and when people leave and people forget that this like you've lost someone. All you're left with is yourself. You don't really have much to hold on to apart from your memories. And so this was something I wanted to talk about in this poem.
Okay.
Okay, thank you so much, Christy, for your
Thank you,
fabulous
Christy.
work and all the best with the picture book. How exciting. We've got several writers with various projects going on all at the same time. Now let me introduce our third reader for today. She is a fabulous writer. This is Esther Vincent Chaming, who is also editor-in-chief and founder of the Tiger Moth Review and Eco Journal of Art and Literature. She is co-editor of two poetry anthologies, Poetry Moves from Ethos Books, just in 2020 came out, and Little Things, also from Ethos Books, a very good literary press here, that came out in 2013. Her debut poetry collection, Red Earth, woo! Which was a finalist for the Gaudy Boy Poetry Book Prize in 2020, is forthcoming from Blue Cactus Press, a press in Washington. Her poems have been published online and in print anthologies locally and internationally. A literature educator by profession, she is passionate about the relationships between art, literature, and the environment. Now, I am going to share a slide that Esther has provided us to talk about the first poem she's going to read. Esther, it's all yours. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks so much, Desmond, for that. Yep, so maybe what I'll do is I'll just give some context about both poems, since Desmond has very kindly shared the slides, and then maybe we can return to the website and I can read the poems. So the first slide you see here is actually a compilation of a couple of photos from an article by the Straits Times. This was published in 2018, and my first poem, Crossing, responds to this specific article. This article that is entitled "While Samba Deer Put Down Due to Severe Injuries After 3-Vehicle Accident on the BKE." So I vividly recall that I was reading this as I was in the vehicle, in a taxi on the way to school. And I think I was, if I'm not wrong, I was in fact using the BKE as well. So I think there was a little bit of culpability. If you read the poem and when you listen to it being read later on, you will perhaps be able to detect that. So you might notice that the poems, at least the two poems here, respond to animals, the situation of animals in our urban setting. And in this case, I felt very strongly about the samba deer and how I guess human and animal interactions were resulting in fatalities on the part of the animals, in this case, the samba deer. And yeah, so Crossing is actually my response to the situation of increasing number of roadkills in Singapore. For those of us who are not aware or familiar, the samba deer is actually on the red list, and it's listed as a vulnerable species. And I think we have less than 20 deer in Singapore today. Okay, so that's Crossing. And maybe if you can go to the next slide. Yep, so the second poem is entitled The Blue Mountains, and it responds to the Australian bushfires in 2019 to 2020. So I understand that colloquially, it's termed as Black Summer, right? And I think in 2019 and 2020, that was quite an unprecedented number of fatalities, amount of deaths, number of deaths, and even billions of lives lost. So human and more than human. And I recall that when I was looking through, reading the news, the articles, this particular image from the India Times stood out to me. And I do have fond memories of Australia, and I allude to them in my poem. And I guess the poem also was a way for me to reconcile some of these feelings, I guess, that I had about the situation, about being removed from the place, and in Singapore, how am I responding to what's happening across the world? Yeah. So maybe I'll read the poems now, and then we can have a chat about the poems. Okay, so the first poem, Crossing. The samba deer in the photograph is folded onto the street, red cloth over her eyes, a bead of sweat hanging from her lips. I see through my screen how she is still alive, brown torso upright after the hit. But by the time I read this news, her body is cold. She is no longer breathing. Put to death by a team of experts, a luckless way to go. The article says she was in great distress. I imagine the screech and crash, the great impact, honkings and bright headlights, legs weak and impotent, the stress of sitting still, waiting for a dignified end. And though I never knew her, I want to remember. Imaginary friend, let me resurrect your broken body from the dirt and ash. Let your soul re-enter the world of the living through this breath as you rise again to reclaim the earth with your quiet existence. Perhaps you will choose to walk calmly along a secluded road or chew on grass in a clearing, your head bowed low, eyelids soft and content. Why do you share this forest, knowing we will betray you one day? You do not speak, but look at me gently, holding my gaze in a deep, deep pool of endless knowing. You teach me to forget my need for words and language. You teach me to stay in this delicate moment, in our eyes, our reflections crossing. Okay, and then the next poem, The Blue Mountains. The Blue Mountains. 21 years ago, my parents sold our 4-room apartment so we could travel south. I remember Sydney, the Opera House, the Blue Mountains. Dogs furry and big as grown sheep. The clear mist of mountain air, the plunging cable ride to the Three Sisters, their stony, ancient forms standing still and foreboding in the quiet valley. I told my mother I would retire there one day. 20 years later, bushfires would sweep across the mountains, not discriminating between bird or tree, insatiable in its taking. Everywhere, fire and smoke thickening, darkening the sky. Millions die, their charred bodies lying side by side on a scorched black earth, while I sit unscathed in front of a screen, trying to process my grief. Of all the photographs, this, a Joey hugging a wire fence, its charcoal face smiling at the camera, its young leathery body now dusty and crumbling. What bravery, what foolhardiness, what bliss, to give death one final grin before the fire came for him too. Australia is burning, and the mountains of my memory are turning blue. I think how this poem could be a leaking hose, running out of water to quench a dry and angry land. But I also think how it could be brimming, undefeated, full of life in its last breath before the raging dark. Yeah, so those are my two poems. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Esther, for gracing our space with such important work. Hey, you do amazing work on Tiger Moth Review, and you've published hundreds of authors from across the world, right? You have a real sense of, eco-poetics, eco-literature, eco-criticism. Can you tell us what the landscape is like there? How receptive are people to? I know it's come back in the last few years because of, how the whole world is so much more aware of the pressing need to talk about these things. Tell us what it's just like,
Yeah. So actually, thanks so much for the plug, Desmond. Yeah, so I founded the Tiger Moth Review in 2018, towards the end of 2018, in October. And we've published 6 issues since. And in fact, some of the readers here, like Waikit and Eugenia, they do have the work published in previous issues of the Tiger Moth Review as well. Yeah, so I think in the last two, 2019, 2020, and this year, so maybe the last 3 years, I would say that there is actually a lot of writing, a lot of, I would say, eco-consciousness, maybe. A little bit harder maybe to get from just from Singapore, but I think it's picking up, and especially in terms of the global scene, I do receive quite a lot of submissions, responding to, not just in poetry but also in art, in photography, responding to the environment, responding to specific maybe climate events. So definitely there is a rising, I would say, a growing consciousness. And yeah, there's a lot of work that I think that's not just published on the Tiger Moth, but also elsewhere in other magazines as well. So very heartening to know that people are concerned, and they do feel invested, in the earth. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you feel about the ability for the lyric, for poetry to do that kind of important work of agency, of advocacy, the whole idea of political poetry, right? We see your work here as being very confessional, so important, and yet it's saying something very important about the trauma that nature has to suffer, right? Because of our Anthropocene, right? So what do you think about political poetry and advocacy for poets?
I mean, I do think that the poems that, I'll just use my poems as an example. So I do think that, for instance, the poems that I write, so since we're at the Blue Mountains, we'll look at that. Yeah, so definitely there is in a poem, the poet can draw on their personal experiences, right? So it could be a personal experience, it could be a personal story, it could be the story of someone they know, or of stories they've read, of observations they've made of other people. But there is that drawing on that personal experience and memory, and then linking it to bigger issues and bigger themes. So in this case, there is that reference to a memory, a childhood memory from a long time ago, and then connecting it to events happening today. So current events that are happening. So for instance, I mentioned this was alluding to the 2019-2020 bushfire. So a visit that the persona had. In fact, the writer, a visit that I made many years ago, and then connecting it to experiences that are taking place in the world today, and then trying to make sense of it. So how do I connect to a place, right? To this specific place? What is my relationship to the people, to the animals, to the plants in this region? How legitimate is my grief? Because the grief is real, and yet I'm not there physically, right? To feel the smoke, or to get asphyxiated from the smoke, or to be burnt alive, for instance, by the smoke. So there's all these, I think, entanglements, and a lot of the work that I do now as well in terms of ecofeminist writing is also to think about entanglements between the humans, right, Homo sapiens and other species, in a more ecocentric way. And so I think in that sense, there is that political consciousness, when we think about an ecocentric worldview. I think that in itself raises many questions about culpability, about what is our role and place on Earth right now as human beings, and how do we relate to others. Yeah.
Nice. Thank you so much. Eric, you want to chime in?
Yeah, so Esther, thank you very much for those poems.
Yeah.
I love the Blue Mountains. And you mentioned the three sisters, and there's a stump there named Dave, right?
I'm not very
Beside the
sure.
three sisters. And yeah, so it's a tragedy for some people, and it's also one um, for the whole of humanity, because the Blue Mountains are in fact much older than the more famous Grand Canyon in the U.S.
Mm,
Right?
yeah, definitely.
And this the bushfires that they have there seem to be an annual thing,
Mm.
which is a very sad state to be in. And I was just wondering, like the poem about the dead Joey reminds me of Elizabeth Bishop. I wonder if you like what who are your influences for some of your echo poetry,
Mm.
Esther?
Influences, yeah. Yeah, so I think maybe since yeah, I'll just respond to the first poem maybe for
Yeah.
crossing. So for crossing, I actually write in response to William Stedford's Traveling Through the Dark. And yes, I've also read some of Elizabeth Bishop's work. I think there's no one specific poet that I write to. I do read quite widely, I like to think. And then I think in reading widely, I kind of develop my own voice as well. So if you ask me to pinpoint one, it's very difficult, but a number of poets that have influenced my writing. Mary Oliver, I love her work. Grace Nichols, also in terms of writing about plays, about migrations and movements. And the rhythm of her language is also beautiful. I love Joy Harjo's work as well, Linda Gregg. So I think like quite a wide range of poets do influence my writing.
Mm.
Yeah, I don't know if that
And now you are in
answers your
fact
question.
nurturing a lot of new poets through the Tiger Moth Review, right?
Yeah,
And
I hope.
thanks for
Yeah,
And,
that
yeah.
and
great gift.
yeah, and Esther teaches as well and has taught literature. So just like Y Kid. Esther, come tell us about your new book. How exciting, Red Earth.
Okay. All right. So I don't have a cover. I don't have the book because it's not physically with me yet. It's still in press.
Yeah.
Yeah, but Red Earth is so Crossing and the Blue Mountains are taken from Red Earth, which is my debut collection of poetry. And I really have to thank Boy Kim Ching, who is my master supervisor, for his supervision in this collection of mine. Yeah, so Red Earth will be out, I think, in September, if I'm not wrong. And yep, it will be available on online, both in the US market and as well as in Singapore. So in Singapore, Page Setters is helping us with the distribution. And yeah, it's really a collection of eco-feminist poetry, I would say, reflecting on a wide range of themes. So drawing on memory, time, and place. I refer to many of my dreams as well in the poems, and also to histories of migrations, of movement. I think a lot of movement, and in relating to others as well. So I'm quite, I would say, uh, I do contemplate quite a bit on my relationship with other species. That's one of my interests, as you can see from the two poems here. So a lot of relating to, let's say, moths, whales, yeah, the deer and all that. So yeah, that's Red Earth coming out in September. You can look out for it. The cover is very beautifully designed by an artist based in Singapore. Her name is Shu Yin. Yeah, so you can check it out.
Is that the one with the red orb?
Yes, it is.
Oh, it's stunning. It's gorgeous. Huge congrats, Esther.
Thanks,
So happy
Desmond.
for you when we saw it, when you told us about it on Facebook. All right, so thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Yep. Let's move on to our next fabulous writer. And Eric, can you do the honors of
Yeah, it's my pleasure to introduce a friend of mine and co-editor. Claire Betita de Guzman is a Filipino writer based in Singapore and a former editor at Cosmopolitan Philippines in Harper's Bazaar, Singapore. She's the author of 4 novels: Miss Makeover, Budget is the New Black, Girl Meets World, and No Boyfriend Since Birth, which was adapted into a TV series in the Philippines. She's co-editor of Get Luckier, which we're working on right now. And she's working on her next novel, and she can be found at www.clairebatita.com. Right, Claire, you're sharing with us some personal experiences.
Yeah, thank you, Eric, and thank you, Des, for having me. This is such a wonderful project, and I'm enjoying myself so far. This is really
Great.
wonderful. Anyway, so yeah, I'm sharing two poems. One is part of the anthology, and the other one is the new old poem, which we can't share screen. But this one, entitled Adieu. When I wrote this poem, I was actually ruminating about loss and language. I'm currently learning another language just to keep sharp, I guess. And I started I came across words and nuances, and this particular word, actually, adieu, struck me because before learning French, I would say adieu, and people would actually correct me and say that's not the way to say goodbye. It should be au revoir, because adieu actually means farewell and goodbye forever. It's like adieu actually means to God. So it's like when you say adieu to someone, it's like this is the last time we're going to see each other alive. The next time we're going to see each other will be with God. And so that struck me really. And it was, I don't know why it stayed for me for days. And so a poem worked its way out of me. And so it's quite personal and really just out of a curiosity for languages also. And I also wanted to explore like the concept of understanding each other, like trying to understand something. You feel like, okay, finally I know the answers. Finally, I know the meaning of this. And you think that your pain is lessened. You feel less pain. Everything is clear, but actually it's not. It's like it even becomes more painful once you know what really is. And so I thought about like language being a cushion. Not knowing the nuance of something can actually cushion you from pain. So it's like it's a survival tactic. Anyway, okay. And we can talk about it later if you want. Okay, adieu. I will learn this language even if it's too late, even if the fetching, tempting curves of your mother tongue, elegant, mysterious, and once mine, now as casual and hapless like aging perfume, trapped in an airplane just about to land. Like a tableau, admired yet already discarded in the 2 seconds it will take you to move to the next spectacular view. Or a flowered pathway, trampled to obsession, just before it's dismissed as passé, so forgettable. Remember, we had a garden like Versailles. The words, once ours was Eden, now reduced to something less than a good moment. What we could not have imagined as we formed our own mystical orbit were aberrations, a bathtub full of bikes, mangled tenses, murdered pronunciation, a semblance of a coded yet crumbling dream arranging themselves into something precious and symmetrical. But no, not like the Eiffel Tower or Chatuchak Market, where, if I press my eye, the gods have been both cruel and kind. Death comes, I discover, once a sound starts to mean something. And that I, like a ghost, can kill myself over and over with a word or an inflection. Breathing, after all, can come in the form of routine dissection, a commonplace wish. The moment I die is when you show me the right words without moving your lips. So I lull myself into something slipshod and affordable, something like grief. All this time believing finality would be easier in the uncertainty of your language. Okay. And I'll move on to my next poem. I also want to add for this poem, I just want to add that it's also about experiencing something greater, like a pain so great and overwhelming, it's beyond grief. And so we turn to something that we know, which is grief, but actually we feel something else, something stronger, something bigger. But we just hold on to grief because that's what we know. So this is what I would like to add, that this is what the poem is also about. All right, I have another poem, which is not part of the anthology, but which I would also like to share. It's also about trauma, how we've been traumatized by how we've been conditioned all these years, and especially now. And it's also like about a loss of, it's also about a loss of what is real, what is true, what's real, what's not. So the title is Maybe It's All a Scam. Maybe it's all a scam. Just like those incredible photos on Instagram where the northern lights dip into your glass ceilinged room, bluffing like it was just another day. Where girls perch on a cliff on their heels and tippy toes, just close enough to the edge to make you die. As if without a million costume changes or 119 takes. Or the way the world promises that you can find an accomplice, naked and dirty and rolling on white sheets, unafraid of stains and imperfections, just like that. Or how it hints and hoodwinks that you can pummel words into a book or be something simple, something great. The way mountains are privy to a mystical ruse to make you feel like you're on top and far away from that black dot in your heart, saying you're not really you or it, a poet or anything but just problematic, desperate for an outlet. On paper, after all, is where bitterness can sound heroic, where it is possible that no one ever looks beyond the black and white, at all the blood and gore and death, clever and neatly cached, at all the twisted, toppled through your core or running straight up from head to toe. These you have been tricked into futile untangling, lapping clean and white with your tongue, when actually other body parts will do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. And let me just confirm something. Adi, is this a COVID-19 poem?
Yeah, it was written last year at the height of COVID, and yeah, and I also experienced loss in my family.
So Claire, can you tell us a bit about, you were saying that you're going to also explore the idea of language and its relationship with pain and grief, and we see that in your poems. Can you tell us a bit more about that? And also, very importantly, that you're a novelist, a very good novelist. And what is it like working in fiction and then moving into poetry? What sort of issues of aesthetics come into the fore when you're shifting across genres, and on top of it, you've done journalism, so that's nonfiction, right? So tell us what it's like crossing genres, right?
Yeah, I guess poetry is really a sort of comfort for me. It's like a safer place for me. When you're a journalist, it's like you have to tell it as it is, the real thing, the facts, and I think with writing a novel, it's the same. It's you tell a story, you tell a plot, you have this happens because this happened, and it's so on and so on. So some things have to be clear, and I get a lot of exhausted moments trying to work out everything, even as a journalist, like writing an article. I mean, I try to be a reader and say, can people understand this thing? I mean, is there a hole here? Or I don't want to be misunderstood, and I don't want readers to be running around in circles. And so there's this thing about being clear. There's this thing about being logical in a way, even in novels. I mean, I write realistic fiction, and my books are romantic comedies, but they still have to have that clear. It's almost a formula, actually, in my earlier books, and I was told by publishers that this is the formula. You need to follow this. So I have been trained that, but I have been writing poetry as a small child, and as I ruminated about that, I realized it's really like a comfort for me to be a little hidden. So poetry for me is to hide something, and to be in another world, and to share with others that kind of, how to say it, art or world or provocation. So I think that's it. As a novelist, I'm like, I'm out, I'm this. I'm out there, I'm 1, 2, 3, 4, I'm this.
Yeah.
As a poet, it's I can hide behind this.
Yeah.
So I'm fascinated by this uncertainty, by this vagueness, which is a good thing, I think.
Yeah. And in terms of craft, storytelling, writing novels, what are the elements which probably, you know, most obsess you when you're writing out the novel? Is it character? Is it plot? Is it diction? Is it your exposition or backstory? You know, give some of the, you know, viewers all over the world some tips on what it's like to write a whole novel of 80,000 words.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I think it's about character and telling, and the story that she has to tell, and about the reader identifying with that character. I mean, it could be anybody. It could be, you know, a character can be old, young, of any race. But I feel that if you're a novelist, you try to make that connection to your reader, and that character story becomes your story. So it's more, for me, it's more about character and the story that you have to tell, and making that into your story.
Okay.
So,
That's great. Well, you're clearly a very successful author. If you've got 4 books and big publishers are taking on your work, so huge congrats. And you want to tell us a bit about your new novel, or is it
yes.
Yeah, come tell us.
No.
Yeah.
No. So thank you, Des. And I used to write romantic comedies, and now I'm making the shift to how do you say it? Contemporary fiction, drama.
Oh.
And I'm really eager to share this story to the world, because I have been delving into all these characters. My book is called Hue City. It's set in Singapore, Vietnam, and the Philippines, and yes, and what's important for me is that I tackle all these issues, and I tackle issues on abandonment, trauma, imposter syndrome. So things that I actually feel I have felt at one point in my life, and I feel that it can be told in an entertaining story. And so Hue City is really about a novel about starting over. And I think it's very fitting. It's very fitting to what we're experiencing now.
Wow, it's amazing that it's spanning 3 whole countries. That is a huge challenge for a writer. So thank you so much for sharing, Claire. All right.
Thank you.
Such an honor to have you with us, and you are editing Get Luck here, which is very exciting, right?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Claire. All right, we have our next wonderful contributor. He's Ho Kin Yun, whom I've known for yonks. Kin Yun's work has appeared in Cha 24 Flavors, Anima Methodi, Singapore Rimo 2017, and Food Republic, a Singapore literary banquet, among lots of other journals and places. You can contact him. He was very shy. He didn't want to put it in his bio, but I told him I need permission to do this. So yet he has worked for 7 years at Wiley, a very big international publisher, and he's worked at Wiley in different capacities, from editorial to content management, worked on various journals of every kind, right? So he's a really seasoned editor in-house, and he's going to share his very exciting poem. Kin, it's all yours. You need to unmute. Yes, thank you, Kin.
Yep. Hi, Des. Thanks for that, as always. Yeah, I think I'll just go right into the reading first, and then maybe we'll talk a bit about it after. Okay, so it's quite a long one. It's called From the Fainting Couch. I write this for no one in particular. Blindsided in its gesticulation is my assurance in the existence of a mind passingly my own, that grey matter sheathed in a prideful mane of black, apt in its voidness impending. Some assurance that with time, abysses can be maneuvered, linkages coalesced. Someone once said of the distance between the brain and the mouth, so unwalkable, I asked myself, would I not have braved the distance to tell you in my own voice what I now can only put down in such an expanded time, such that all the corresponding events have undergone dustification, like the BMW outside my sister's house, parked and undriven in years, every revision retyped till my elbows grow stiff, grown folds in skin, which obviously denotes time folding in on itself. How much is left? One pontificates in this way, repeating messages that build rest but accumulate ammo for resentment. It's anathema to me. Coffee enemas are the enemy. In between clouds drips, I look up in bewilderment and thanksgiving, not knowing where nor how, but always who. It was you, my love. Then this is for you as much as it is for me, for them, for her, for him, who stood above through it all, reclined to fall under the weight of something beyond my strength. Impossible, wasn't it written? My recollection dissipates. It does what it does, it serves who it serves, and therein I must exist, in between each act of servitude. What pathetic crisis is this? The one you sleep on but hope to wake from. Some kind of dream precursing putridity. Something must be. A holocene of wobbly knees. Why write this then? Who is it for, really? Maybe it just saves maybe. Maybe sub-vocalizations are to speech entirely lesser beings. Unnoticed, so forgiven, but that's not what I want. That's the first thing I prayed would return after all. Will it ever? Perhaps it doesn't matter. Like hell it doesn't. When do the blind lose the desire to see? God is crazy. But he isn't he? James 2 or James 3, I'm speculating. Rats. Postulating returns on my grace. Postures of grace notwithstanding. Faith ever striding. I sold these for a time. Assured, uninsurable, gift packs included. But which was the product? And was the other truly free? They both should be, though I received them lying down, so who knows despite me. My daily bread through tube and time dose. Time an emptied syringe right, and it's a loaded magazine. That's what I learned while reading myself, outside of myself, eyeing inwards, saying with my eyes, saying, make me listen to me. Before I fade, will me to pray tell you tell me that it's okay. It's all well. Well, it depends. It's okay. It's always allowed, isn't it? It is. And not everyone endures it. Not everyone comprehends. What a painful bliss. What could it mean to me? Such a thing as this.
Thank you, Kin. Hey, you want to tell us a bit about this very amazing, remarkable prose poem? Come. And I know you're such a fantastic writer, so receiving this from you was just magic. Come, tell us about it.
Yeah, well, okay, so I guess, yeah, it's a quite a long poem, and it comes from a very personal experience. So the reason I wrote it in a stream of consciousness sort of manner is to sort of put forth like the multitudes of like thoughts and feelings like which pass through the narrator. In this case, the narrator is my mom, who passed away recently from cancer. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually wrote this poem. So her death actually occurred in between writing this poem. So I was writing it while she was still around, and then she passed away, and then I finished it after she passed away. So there were moments where I thought I would change the direction of the poem, but ultimately I wanted it to end in a sort of exalted sort of tone, something that sort of goes back to her never failing faith. So yeah, the poem was it's pretty hard to read, as you could have told, but in a way it was sort of to capture what I felt was going through her mind, and also the confusion she had. Basically, she sort of lost her speech towards the end of her life, and that was a big deal for her because she was a big talker. She was super talkative, and so yeah, I wanted to sort of encapsulate the confusion she went through in a way that I sort of could feel that she was going through. And yeah, she tried to actually write on paper at the beginning when she was losing her speech, but the unfortunate thing was that it sort of was good for a while, but after a while it was more like I read like the pieces of paper that she wrote on, and she was just trying to write her name over and over again, like our names, the names of her loved ones, her phone number, her address. So these were things that she was trying to keep in her mind, and I guess I sort of used that as sort of launching point for my story come poem, because I guess this anthology states that writing can be ameliorating, it can be cathartic, but for her it was more of a it was probably that, but it was also an additional source of distress because that was all she could write, right? She couldn't write anything more complex than just our names, her own name, sometimes spelled wrongly. So I wanted to give that back and forth of faith and fear and doubt within the poem itself. Even a line, "God is crazy," was quoted verbatim from her. She said it, and that's like something that I never thought she would say. So I just tried to imagine what was going through her mind when she could say something like that. And I suppose ultimately, though, she tried her best to have a smile on her face, even though it was even hard for her to smile towards the end. So I felt that I had to end the poem in an exalted fashion, and to sort of reflect that ultimately her faith prevailed, her faith in spirituality, and maybe not in science, and sometimes not in spirituality as well, but ultimately her faith prevailed. And yeah, I just wanted to capture that.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a loving tribute, Desmond, and and you can hear me. I'm sorry, my video camera has gone through trauma. I know what happened there. And the thing is, yeah, if I shut down, this will be gone. So I'm just keeping it. I can hear everything, and I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
And I suppose this is your way of coping with your mom's experience, and your way of filling in for her. You're actually voicing out her feelings and her aspirations here. And was it a liberating experience?
Yeah, I think I needed to write it.
Yeah.
Even before her death, I knew I wanted to write this sort of to give in not her voice per se, but her son's voice, someone who loves her, like what she might be thinking and what might be going through her mind during this ordeal, and the congested thoughts, or maybe even the lack of thoughts that might be going through her mind. It was hard for me to comprehend, but I thought by writing it, maybe it could give other people maybe an idea of like something to start on as to what she might have gone through during that period within her mental faculties.
Yeah, and Kin, I remember you sharing this with me at a workshop at Arts House, and it's really tragic because I've taught you over 10 years ago and your brother, and I know there are 3 boys in the family, your dad and your mom. So losing your mom means you've left the only woman in your family. So I remember asking you what that's like. You know, we writers sometimes focus on the craft so much, we forget to ask people how they're doing. How's your family doing? You know, all men.
Oh, yeah, they're doing well. In fact, my dad is probably the strongest of us, because I guess he and my mom shared that faith. So yeah, it's good. It's a good beacon for us to latch on to, and I think as a result, me and my brothers have been doing quite okay. We cope with it in our different ways. My younger brother's a musician, so he's been writing a lot of music about this.
Yeah, he just got first class honors from
yeah.
London, isn't it? Congrats to him.
Yeah.
So, and I know that you have a full manuscript. You've got a full manuscript that's been a work in progress for a long time. You want to tell us a bit about it? That I think it's prose though. It's prose. Is it
it's not full yet, so it's it is a work in progress. It's actually something not too related to trauma and healing. It's an anthology on birds. So I've taken up bird watching since the pandemic, and I think the patience and the stillness of the hobby is something that I can really draw a lot of emotion and thoughts from. So it's a work in progress, but essentially there's definitely gonna be a story about my mom, and yeah, hopefully it goes somewhere. Yeah.
Okay. Well, you're a genius. Thank you so much, Kin, and
thanks, Des.
Such beautiful work. Thank you for saying yes to joining us. He's always so shy. Kin's always so shy. So just convincing him to come read is amazing. Thanks, Kin. Okay. And next we have another darling writer, Shilpa. Eric is going to do.
I can introduce her.
Yes.
Although I'm in the dark there on the screen, but it's my great pleasure to introduce Shilpa. Shilpa Dixit Tapliel is an author from Singapore. Her poetry collection is entitled Between Sips of Masala Chai. It was published by Kitab in 2019. She is a nominee for the Pushcart Prize, Best of Small Presses Anthology 2021. And her poems have been featured in anthologies, journals, and online magazines in Singapore, India, and the US. She has read poetry in Malaysia at the Kalagoda Arts Festival Mumbai and at Poetry Festival Singapore, in which she is hosting 2 programs. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Shilpa.
Yep. Thank you, Eric. That was very kind introduction of you, and very happy to be here. Thank you, Desmond, and thank you, Eric, for this lovely anthology which you all have put together. Listening to everyone's poems have been such a delight and a solace, a source of solace, because whatever we are and wherever we are all united by the same emotions, and life takes us through our trials and tribulations and experiences, and we are all connected through emotions by the unity of the emotions evoked by these kind of incidents in our life. So, yeah. So I will read the first poem. I have written 2 poems in this anthology, and they both are in response to COVID-19, because COVID has played such a havoc, and it was like a bombshell, right? And it hit us and none of us knew what's happening. So this is written in the form of a ghazal. Ghazal is an Urdu kind of a poetry, Arabic poetry, which is written mostly where you are kind of pining or you are talking of separation or loss. And I thought that, the kind of, you kind of like miss the normal life which we have been leading until COVID. And I said, okay, let me just use this poem. So it's called The Ghazal of COVID-19. Gaia buckles propelled to the edifice of COVID-19. Her spin barreled under a lockdown of COVID-19. Sun trudges dewy to dusken. We shade zones, split spaces in isolation of COVID-19. We test tensile strength of our cabled lives, devour virtual tenors, vlogging of COVID-19. We tie-dye our linens, store silks in muslin, plaster stilettos on walls, wops of COVID-19. Creases on our forehead span a latitude. Paused, we tilt further on the axis of COVID-19. Autumn comes early, we lie strewn, veined. Starlit spring lies restless on the curve of COVID-19. Logged on register, breaches of circuit breaker. Blink, breathe through the mask of COVID-19. Dear lost heart, the North is resetting. Restore, rise from the abyss of COVID-19. So that's the first poem. And the second one is called Ikigai. Ikigai, as you all know, is the word, to find your own love and your inner peace. So this poem is actually more, I bring in a lot of, we had like the migrant workers who were confined in their dorms. And therefore we saw that, we missed, they are kind of so much faceless, right? When they are doing their work. And when it doesn't happen, we realize it. So there are elements of that which are there in the poem. Then there is an element of, our hawkers, when we visit our hawker centers and then we cannot visit them anymore, the loss of that. And the hospitals which are like burdened by everything. People who are writing and who actually used to have our art centers and, our live poetry, all that is gone. So behind all this, what is happening and what makes sense? How do we make sense of all this? So this poem is called Ikigai. We scrape grout, peel veggies, learn to compost. We billow air into dusty curios, replay childhood videos. Canary in the lemon sun sings her song. For a brief moment, we are congruent. We think of the hawker auntie, strength of her arms in serving the alia. Our path to the bus stand, kindness in pruning bougainvillea. Mimosas sprout on city pavements, soulful in their pace. Steel labyrinths holler on empty streets. Our perimeters lie drawn. Across the river, a hospital heaves, sutured smiles, fluid-filled lungs, goodbyes on screen. Bare masked mothers hold infants to breasts of uncertainty, whispering to their saucer face, corolla limbs, lullabies of Ikigai. Vagabonds of the soil run through empty wind, chasing dreams after morning dew. The bard of Chittagong hums into the Kalang basin. Word by word, voice lifts past borders, nudges Ikigai out of her womb. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shilpa.
Thank
I
you.
remember that at the start of stricter restrictions in Singapore, we had a phone call and I was in a car on a way to a meal at a restaurant. It was just the day before the restrictions at dine-ins, right? And I think you were saying that you were spending the time with the family and you were having meals. And did you develop your Ikigai during that difficult time?
Yeah, I mean, we have done so many things together. We kind of like, even though we were not able to go out, we kind of brought the outside into our lives. So we made this, dining area in our balcony. We brought in, good dining ware, dinnerware, brought in some lights and sat there so that, even for our children, it's such a good way to show that we can do so much more meaningful things with just very little. I think COVID has taught us all that we just need the love of people around us. We do not need too much of fancy stuff. As long as we are able to get, find happiness, it pushes us to find happiness in little things, playing board games, and engaging in meaningful conversations with one another, not just staring at screens. Of course, binge watching also happens, which is fun. But then, so all these things I think has somewhere kind of like really brought us all in the space where there is a lot of calmness, despite all the disquiet which is happening outside. Right? There is so much going on outside, but at the end of it, we all are pushed to understand that we can, if we want, find a little bit of our own inner balance if we look deeply into it. So little things, and then you become more grateful to everything around you. All those people who were there, who were working, who were like, kind of, as I said, faceless. And we just become so much aware of how much importance they have always brought into our lives. And we become grateful, more and more grateful of everything around us. So
it's wonderful. You have such an infectious hopefulness, Shilpa.
Yes, it's got a
This is
heart of
good to hear.
gold.
And during the
sorry.
pandemic,
yeah,
a lot of people became sourdough bread bakers. And in your case, did you write more poems? Because I know you were productive during that time.
I was. Though I thought that when you mentioned sourdough, I could get to boast about my bread. I mean, I started doing that only during the pandemic. I never baked bread, and then
It's like many people I know. Yeah.
Yeah, we all kind of. But yes, I think during the pandemic, it kind of really brought us more, because there was so much going on, right? So how to deal with poetry is always meant for me to deal with things around me and within me. And it's a very good way to distill my thoughts in lesser words. So for me, when COVID happened, I kind of like really took to writing a lot, and a lot of things, COVID poems, but even non-COVID poems. And I went on to write so much more. And that piece, as I said, the piece within the disquiet outside is very funny. The juxtaposition of the whole thing, which COVID brings, is kind of like once in a lifetime. Hopefully we can get past this soon and, see beyond it.
Shilpa, I have a question I have to ask you, right? And you've lived in Singapore for quite some time, but you have roots in India, right?
Yes.
And those are very important roots. And in your book, there's so much of that culture and identity that works through your lyric and your lines. Tell us what it's like, to hold that sort of complexity of identity, coming from a different place, coming into a new country, the adjustments, how that works itself through your poetry, yeah. And on top of it, you've also headed the organization for Indian women writers in Singapore. So you really have a great sense of how the community looks at our country, at the culture here. And well, are we inclusive enough? You know, are we doing the right things? Tell us, Shilpa.
Yeah. So when we move to a new place, right, there's a lot of trepidation involved, right? You do not know what your routine will turn out to be. You do not know the locality. You do not know the extended, that the things which we were so familiar with in our home country, the brands, etc. We do not know if I will be able to come out and get my brand of say cosmetic, or my brand of the bread, or my brand of the tea. Because in India, we are huge chai makers, right? We all have a lot of tea at home. So we were not. But then, so these are the small things. The bigger things, I think, for people who move or who migrate is the roots, as you mentioned, which are there in our country, which we leave behind, family, friends. And it really pinches you a lot, because every time you go back, you see people aging. You see your parents aging, because you cannot afford to make, once in a month trip. You can maximum do twice in a year trips, matching with the holidays of the children. And so every time you go back, you can see a little bit of a difference in their and it kind of like somewhere tugs your heart, and you don't know whether you have done the right thing of leaving. But then you settle here and you see your children settled well and safe and happy, and so much of opportunity here. And I have been living here since 20 years now. So this is my home, and I don't see myself anywhere else. And the main reason is because it's always been so inclusive. It's always been such a beautiful place to settle in. We have had so many friends right from the day one. I mean, I had my friends who have taken me on as family, and we always do our lohe with them, and they come and spend Diwali with us, and so there is a lot of we don't feel that we are, so alien. Singapore is a beautiful place. But having said that, I think in anything, we always will have some shortcomings, but that's how life is. You will always have this, weaving of things, where sometimes it's a pull and sometimes it's a push. So it's okay. I think we all understand that when we are all stressed, we kind of we need outlets, right? And the Indian fabric here in Singapore, I think, are very, very eager to assimilate and very eager to integrate. And we have seen a lot of people coming in, and I think they are drawn to the beautiful, the beauty of Singapore by the landscape, but also because it's such a, it has always been so socially cohesive, right? It has always been, as we know, the pledge of Singapore is always tells us that. So we see that, we have seen that all along in Singapore. So that has always been very nice for us. And the Indian Women's Association, which I'm a part of, and I chair the Writing Enthusiast Club. I mean, we find that there are so many people who have so many stories in their mind. And for me, because I have come through that process, I would really like to pull, stories out of people. And that's what I try to, my little endeavor is that. And yeah.
Okay.
So Shilpa is touching on something very important there, the need for a close social support network. And there's plenty of research on this, on trauma. But people need to have friends or their loved ones to support them when they're really down and out, as well as having some passion, which you have been talking about as well, and which we find in Ikigai, the poem. Yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Shilpa, I think that's all the time we have. Okay, but I mean, because we are really tight on time, but actually Shilpa had another poem. It's an Anima Methode, and just to tell y'all that the poem was written based on the passing of her beloved father. in 20. You know what? Please read the poem for us. This is impossible that, you know, I'm even saying that. Please just read the Anima Methodi for us because it's such an important poem. That,
Are you sure?
do you
Okay,
have
I'll
it?
just make it a quick read. Otherwise,
Yeah.
so the Anima Methodi of the crisp bhindi. Bhindi is okra. It's the Hindi word for okra is bhindi.
Oh.
The four walls looked at one another. Weren't they just preparing for dinner? The summer air is pregnant with stuffed bhindi, left to turn crisp in the pan. He was just an hour ago swimming in the pool. Now, hushed chants and mantras are being recited for the peaceful journey of his soul. The walls look bare, their creaminess ashen. White linen sheets lie softened, tread by 1,000 feet. Crushed petals, red, orange, white, contrast the stark room. Sandalwood incense inches its way up summer curtains. Tonsured heads exchange notes on health and potions, and women sob quietly, their glass bangles tinkle in trepidation. She emerges from behind the bare walls, ashened in white linen, inquires whether the bhindi is crisp enough. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shilpa, for sharing. And that was written on the passing of your dear father in 2009. Thank you so much for sharing that poem. I'm so
It's
glad
beautiful
I got
too.
Yeah. And thank you for saying all those important things about what it's like being here and being part of the community. Yeah.
Thank you.
Love you.
And we will see you on Friday at the Poetry Festival, Shilpa.
Yeah, I'm so looking forward. Thank you, Eric.
And
Thank you.
Shilpa is very involved this year. Very, very involved. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, we were both collaborating on a project just a few weeks ago, so that was fun, right, Shilpa?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, so next up we have Eugenia, and Eric's going to introduce Eugenia.
Yes, of course. Eugenia Tan is a Singaporean writer who writes poetry, creative nonfiction, and plays. She enjoys cross-pollinating art into multidisciplinary platforms and reviving stories, and she's not afraid of spam mail. You can contact her at hugeton@hotmail.com.
And again, Eugenia,
Eugenia.
is very humble, but her last book was shortlisted for the Singapore Literature Prize. It's an amazing book. I love it. So Eugenia, it's all yours. You wanna read your poems?
Hello, thank you, Desmond and Eric, and also for the rest of the writers. Wonderful pieces of poetry. Yeah, I'll just go straight into it since we're running short of time. When I thought about healing, I thought about how non-linear it is actually, because you know there isn't really we tend to like it to go a certain way, but it doesn't always go that way. So both my poems end on a bit of a note of uncertainty. Yeah. So here's the first poem. Patio. Patio. The patio had 4 white chairs encircling a white table. The chairs were flimsy. A wind would rouse. A chair would be flung. The sound of a house in shambles. We each had our moments on that patio. My father with a beer can, sometimes a guitar. Like a werewolf, the half-formed howl of heartbreak in his heydays. My mother with her work, her guests, her need to entertain, to be her best. Me with my coloring pencils and note paper, the bully of a wind unsettling my childhood scrolls. The tumble of a chair heavy as my mother's body hitting the floor. My father's punch ripe as a fruit fallen from a tree. Okay, and the next poem is Popo's Inbox. Popo actually means, in this case, my paternal grandmother. So this was written after her death. Popo's Inbox. When Popo was alive, she would ask me to wash her phone, meaning to delete messages in her inbox. She never read them, she said. If they were really important, someone would call. Washing her phone, I found laundry messages of adverts, friends of hers who might have also just purchased a phone. relatives who wanted to share philosophy shrunken to a text. I kept that phone when she died, and everyone knew it was important, that she was calling, going silent when they heard my voice on the other line, allowing for grief to dry naturally as wet clothes do, no matter the forecast. Thank you.
Thank you, Eugenia.
Thank you very much, Eugenia.
Eugenia, you know, you've had an interview with Ethos, and I remember you talking about how your work, you know, revolves around the female body and identity. Can you tell us a bit about and Greek mythology? You use a lot of Greek mythology in your work. So can you tell us a bit about your project of your first book, and also what you're working on now?
Sure. I wrote Phaedra, the book, when I was actually under a mentorship with the Arts Council here in Singapore. And I was under mentorship with another poet who also writes a lot on female identity, and her name is Grace Chia Krakovic. Both my grandmothers at the time had died quite near to each other, both my paternal and maternal side. So there were a lot of differences around their deaths. Like my maternal grandmother suffered quite a bit before dying, and then my paternal grandmother died very suddenly after lifelong struggle with alcoholism. So I mean, even the way we grieved around that was, I think, also very different. You know, sometimes, you know, different types of trauma brings forth different types of grief and healing. Yeah. So Phaedra was around that. I chose Phaedra because it was based off a play. I also write theater, so it was based off Sarah Kane's Phaedra. I like Sarah Kane's versions of Phaedra because all her plays have this really innate violence in them, and sometimes the violence is so mindless. I think that comes a lot with being a female in this world. Yeah, and now I'm working with I've been commissioned by the Arts Council to do a film with seniors. So I've been on residency since April in Tampines, which is in the east of Singapore. Been working with a group of seniors to create a film about stories of their time in Tampines. We've been teaching them performing and writing skills, and so yeah, it's also very different working with seniors on talking about their lives and helping them be confident enough to translate that into performance. So that's been very exciting. Yeah.
Thank you.
Wow. Eugenia, earlier, Christy Ng was mentioning how poetry can be dramatic, and maybe you're the best person here to tell us about the commonalities between drama and trauma poetry.
Yeah, I think for in both my approach to theater writing and poetry writing, I take a very small moment and try to stretch that for as much as I can. So, you know, I actually find it to be much easier with poetry. I'm much more myself, much more evocative in poetry, because with theater, you know, you have to get straight to the bone and to cut all the fat and meat from that. And that can sometimes be very difficult to capture, because you can't write stuff. You're just writing like what like all these stakes that are happening. And for poetry, you can explore that a lot more. There's a lot more room for that lyricism. So I really enjoy that. I finished a play this year which was called The Rat Trap, and it was about addiction in families on alcoholism. So that was an example of taking a very small moment and stretching that into something big. So it was about father and daughter trying to catch a rat and looking for the most suitable trap for this rat. And then that brought out, you know, both their struggles on how alcoholic addiction has affected their family. So yeah.
Right.
I hope I answered your question.
That's so
Definitely
productive.
did, yeah.
It's amazing, Eugene. And what about creative nonfiction? So you've talked about poetry, you've talked about plays, playwriting. What about creative nonfiction, that genre? What are the challenges of that?
Really getting to the heart of people, you know, because most of these are essays usually for visual artists in Singapore that I write for, and they sometimes want like a curatorial slant on it. So that's what the creative nonfiction mostly revolves around, and getting to the heart of the art and the artist, because actually it's so important also to understand the artist. That can be very difficult because, you know, a lot of them reveal what they want through their art, and they don't really know what it is about their influence that they want to put forth. And that's, I think, a bit of my job and what I like doing when I talk to them. Yeah, so really I guess I see all these forms of writing as different types of relationships. Strengthening each of these relationships can be both difficult and exciting. Yeah.
Love your voice, love your lyric.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yours too.
Yes, and great that you got vaccinated. All right, thank you. All right, we have to trundle along. Let's hear from Crispin Rodriguez, and I get to introduce darling Crispin, a good friend. Crispin Rodriguez is a poet, short story writer, and essayist. He is the author of 3 whopping poetry collections. They're titled Pantomime, The Nomad Principle, and How Now Blown Crow, which has just been published fresh off the press from Math Paper Press. His poems, short stories, and creative nonfiction have been featured in Kepulauan in 2014, A Luxury We Must Afford in 2016, and a Review, and lots of other journals, right? So Crispin, also educator. Come, go for it.
Hi, thanks, Des. Thanks, Eric. Thanks for inviting me for this. Okay, I'm going to read 2 poems. The first one is an Atelier of Healing, and the second one is from my newest collection, which also deals with trauma poetry. So the poem I have here in Atelier of Healing is called Scar Healing. What we cannot cover must be left in the open for the winds to heal. There is magic in this, to sleep in infection and wake up with a line where a split used to be, now a scar or a scab sealed by sleep, as if the night itself was a doctor ready to patch you up before the day eats you alive. I wrote in my journal, all my cuts and bruises will mend themselves in time, and woke up the missing pages, as though the secret should not be revealed. I'm tearing myself apart intentionally, just to see whether midnight nurses me, or if I'm trying to sleep more easily. Either way, I'm closing wounds. So that's Scar Healing. I'm going to read 1 poem from my new collection called How Now Blown Crow. This is a poem called The Usual Practice. Death learns to pick another metaphor other than night. The shoes, empty by the cupboard, learn that mold is just another layer. Tonight we sleep on a layer of dead skin and cells. While making love, you stopped for more than a minute and I thought you died in me. Outside, a cat watches with the intent of a student, taking notes by scratching the window. In the corner of my eye, a moth emerges from its cocoon and takes flight. After the last thrust, I open the window to let the air in. The moth escapes. The cat left some time ago. You ask for a glass of water since I am up. I kicked the bed frame by accident. We both laugh. Yep, so those are my 2 poems for today.
Fantastic, Crispin. You do so much. You're such a literary advocate. You do so much with bringing writers together and with the National Library Project. You've worked in Poetry Festival Singapore before, but tell us a bit about your love for the pastoral. I know that's your thing, right? That's your thing. Tell us about why you brought it back in fashion, and it's so exciting to see your work. Yeah,
I think it's unconscious that I use a lot of pastoral poetry. I think I try to be political at times, but then at the same time, I think a lot of the pastoral comes from religious teaching. It comes from my Catholic background. It comes from spending a lot of time as a child reading the Bible, and reading a lot of religious work. So when I was a child, my dad exposed me to, besides the Bible, we read the Torah, I read the Talmud, I read a lot of Hindu religious narratives. And I think a lot of that sort of features in the writing as well, that pastoral style, and a lot of it comes from the religious text that I've read as a child.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And your new book, you talk about aging. And the reason I bring this up is that Eugenia just mentioned that she's working with a community of seniors, right, on her play. So tell us a bit about your new book that's really off the press. Huh?
So one of the themes I deal with is aging, and it's more than just aging. I think it's aging together as a couple, and I think that's something that I'm very interested in. Partially because we tend to talk a lot about love as a youthful concept that young people can fall in love. And so what happens to old people? And that was something that I was very interested in. And so what happened was that I actually embarked on a research project. I went to interview elderly people. I think I told this story to Desmond before. It's very interesting. So I went to interview elderly people and asked them about dating rituals and how they maintain their relationships together. And so what happened was that I turned their transcripts of their interviews into poems. And so some of them were quite interesting. So some of them I asked them, like, what were some things your parents warned you about your other half when you were dating? And so I always like to give this example of this really old lady. I mean, she was like 82 or 81. And so I asked her, so what was one thing your mother told you about dating? And she said, oh, when you see a guy, you can look at their ankles. And I thought it was just the weirdest thing. So, you look at the ball of their ankles, and if the ball of their ankles is very small, so if you look at the width of the ankles, if the width of the ankle is very small, you shouldn't date the guy. And the way she said, I was like, wow, this sounds very interesting, so pseudo-scientific. And then she said, oh, it's because there's not enough blood that will run to the testicles, and so therefore there's low sperm count. And then I was like, this doesn't make sense, but it sounds so scientific. I'm going to turn this into a poem about, why you shouldn't date a boy with thin ankles. And that became a poem from that transcript.
Wow.
We'll definitely look forward to reading that, Crispin.
Thank you.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of seeing the manuscript because I wrote book praise for it, right, Crispin?
Yes, thank you so much for that. Really appreciate it.
It's brilliant. It's brilliant. I love his work. Eric, yeah, you want to chime in?
Yes. Earlier you were talking about your influences, and I wonder if the Beat Poets and Bob Dylan figure in your writing of trauma poetry, Crispin.
I'm very heavily. I mean, I started out by essentially writing beat poetry because I was heavily influenced by the Beats and Bob Dylan. I think there's a lot of repetition that goes on. If you read this entire collection, the third collection, it reads like an album. So you have poems that are tied, they're coupled together. There are poems that respond to one another. The metaphor appears and disappears and reappears again. So, for example, I didn't expect it to appear many times, but like salt appears so many times in this collection. I think it appears in 5 poems, and it travels from youth and how when we talk about salt when you're young, it's always the kind of the saltiness of tears. But then when you get to that old age, it's all about prevention of consuming too much salt because it leads to high blood pressure. And so it's interesting how the metaphor of salt travels from youth all the way to old age.
Yeah. Okay. And I have to ask that question again because it's so important. The one that asked Y Kid, who's a teacher, you're a lecturer at a junior college. And so what is the climate like with all this anxiety and depression amongst our adolescents here? And how do you help them with it through literature? I think people really need to know, right?
So yes, so anxiety is a real thing. I mean, like even among my students, and there are various types of anxieties. There's anxiety to perform. There's anxiety to blend in. There's anxiety to meet the standards of their parents or even their teachers. I think it starts off firstly by having proper conversations and not sweeping under the rug. So really talking to your children, talking to young people about facing these anxieties by talking about them first. And then secondly, to let them know that they're not alone when it comes to this. And we teach Silver Plath in my school, and Silver Plath has been an amazing channel for many of these students who are experiencing depression or even suicidal tendencies, or students who feel like they're alone or they're experiencing a heartbreak. And it's interesting how that intersection between literature and their own personal emotions manifests in the liking of the subject. And we often see that students who are, I won't say that all students are depressed, but the students who are going through something, they tend to gravitate to the subject, and they are very candid about how they feel about these poets and these poems, and we're very candid in speaking to them about it. So it's about honesty and having an open communication.
Nice. It's tough work, right? It's tough work.
And Crispin is doing a great job. I see from his social media posts that he engages his students in conversations about these difficult topics.
Yeah. Thank you for doing that fantastic work, Crispin.
No problem, my pleasure. I enjoy doing it. I think at the heart of it is the willingness and the want to work with young people that drives the passion of any teacher.
Yeah, there you go. You should be the next one getting the big award from MOE, just like YKid.
I don't know about that. I'd rather not comment about that.
Well, I've already told you that you should be up for the Young Artist Award from NAC next year. So let's look forward to getting that happen, okay? Because you're doing so much, okay? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Crispin.
Yeah, I said it. Now the whole world knows. Now the whole world knows, Crispin. All right, so Migs is next, okay? Thank you, Crispin. Migs is going to be introduced by a very good friend, Eric.
Both of you are good friends.
Wonderful. So the spotlight is on another friend of mine, Migs Brabadut. Has published in several countries, regions, and cultures. She has contributed poetry to various anthologies and journals in Singapore, Asia, Croatia, and the US. Her short fiction has appeared in 22 New Asian Short Stories, 2016, and the Best Asian Stories 2018. I was in those launches. She has co-edited Get Lucky, and she's co-editing Get Luckier. She's the author of The Rosales House from Penguin Random House, Southeast Asia, which is available all over the world right now. And Migs, the spotlight is on you.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Des, for this opportunity. So I'm going to read a poem which is titled Homestaging. So I'm going to read it first, and maybe I'll share a couple of insights about it after. So here goes. Homestaging. You arrived unannounced one day and stood there as though you didn't know that you weren't welcome in my house. I grabbed you tightly from the front door and pushed you fast to the basement, like a contraband I must hide. Here, I said, you can make a home as long as you don't make a noise. I left you there and locked the door that for days I tried to ignore. And for a while, it was easier to pretend that you were absent. But today, you let out a wail that reverberated through the walls. I unlocked the door hesitantly, and you spiraled out like the wind, stopping only to press at buttons that beat my chest and wrung my heart, bringing a tight lump to my throat. Finally, you flowed out of my eyes. In the aftermath, there's only silence. Like a house when a family departs, it's suddenly quiet, but not peaceful, leaving me buoyant and yet incomplete. I know now to welcome you in next time and stop hiding you at the basement. After all, you're at once a shadow that looms and a shade that allows the light to shine. Every morning when I rise, I must learn to greet you as though you promised the sun. Thank you. So
Thanks, Migs.
thanks, Eric.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I actually wrote this poem because in a way, the way we manage our emotions at times is like home staging. That is, when we home stage, we try to hide the clutter, the cracks. You know, when we're not uncomfortable with acknowledging our emotions, we try to cover them up with sunnier thoughts. But then when I think about it more, you know, those home stage houses, they're not lived in. There are no people inside. And I guess it's true with emotions. It's like to be alive, you have to recognize both the sad part so that you can appreciate the happiness side. And so, yeah, thinking about dealing with loneliness, which we all encounter, it's like for me, I actually try to promise myself that I shouldn't home stage. I shouldn't hide, you know, less sunny, less sunny emotions. I just try to acknowledge it as being a part of myself. They come in passing. I acknowledge them, and then I suppose doing so helps me also to become happy because I know the negative of happiness is, you know, loneliness and vice versa. So if I know both, then I experience happiness the better. Yeah.
Thanks for that commentary, Migs.
Yeah.
When I read it, I thought of Parasite, the movie, and it seems that you is a personification of the dark side in everyone, right? And Migs, I know you have plenty of stories to tell us about how COVID-19 has affected you. Maybe you can tell us one such story.
Yeah. So actually, Eric, I was in the US during the most part of the pandemic. And I've written about this experience in my guest essay with the Washington Post. Actually, because of the pandemic, it became difficult for us to assimilate, I guess, with our neighbors or even with my co-parents in my daughter's school. But more importantly, the notion of distance became more difficult for me. And actually, I've written about this also in a poem with Singpo Raimo. It's the revising the laws of distance. It's because, you know, with the pandemic, of course, I was aware that I was like 10,000 miles from my mom and my brothers in the Philippines and my many friends here in Singapore. But the pandemic made it even farther. So it was like it became a distance that was difficult to traverse. It became impossible. So there was the real physical distance, and at the same time, the psychic distance brought about by the pandemic. Yeah.
Wonderful. And how is your current quarantine, Migs, compared to the previous ones? You could probably write a whole book about quarantines.
Exactly. So I'm a veteran of quarantine now. So the first one was a bit, you know, full of drama in the beginning. But anyway, it ended well last time in December. So this time around, because of our experience from the first quarantine, we came more prepared. So we reserved our hotel in advance so that there wasn't any surprise when we landed in Singapore. So yeah, so we got a better hotel. And I think what I also realized is that being in quarantine, some people think of it as like it's an unproductive time, but actually, I think Shilpa has mentioned about this. It allows one to be, you know, looking more inside. And for me, I'm taking that opportunity to relook at my work. And at the same time, I have these engagements on Zoom. So I just finished my reunion with my high school classmates. Last
We saw your
Saturday.
pictures.
Yeah. So I was still jet lagged, but yeah, I was powered by a venti sized coffee. So
And that's your hotel room, right?
Yeah.
Right in it, right? You've got a fantastic view of the harbor. Is that it? I think you've shown it.
That's right. So it's a bit, actually, it's like, you know, I can see the I can see the sea. I can see the pool below because we're on the 44th floor. So I was just telling myself this morning, it's so near and yet so far. So because there's this glass divide. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Mix, and congrats on the Rosales House, published by Penguin, my dear good friend Migs.
Thank you so much, Des.
And it was perfect.
Eric.
It was perfect because you were in the US and you could promote it in the US. You got a newspaper, run your story there. You made so much good out of your time there, you know.
Yeah, and I've met lovely people also, like the poet laureate of Virginia, the state, and the poet laureate of San Mateo County. And yeah, they've been very helpful.
Lovely, lovely.
Yeah.
It's great to hear.
You got so much done. When I was there, I didn't get much done. All I did was study.
Yeah, but you've stored a lot of knowledge based on your time there.
Okay. Thank you so
Wonderful.
much, Mix. I'm so glad you're back with us. Yes,
Yes,
you're
can't
back in
wait to see you
Singapore.
guys.
Yes,
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, and see you soon.
See
Migs.
you.
Yes.
See you.
Okay, we're going to move to our last lovely reader and a contributor for today, the very accomplished Pan Ming Yen. Ming Yen,
Hi, Desmond.
Hi, Ming Yen, I'm going to introduce you because you're so hard to get, so rare because you're such a busy man. Pan Ming Yen published his debut collection, That Night by the Beach and Other Stories for a Film Score. That's by Ethos Books in 2012. He is also one of the 4 writers in the collaborative writing projects, The Adopted Stories from Angkor and Lost Bodies, Poems Between Portugal and Home, while other short stories have appeared in Quarterly Literary Review Singapore, amongst many places. Ming Yen has also written on the history of music in Singapore in Cultural Connections, the journal of the Culture Academy of the Ministry of Culture, Communications and Youth, and in Singapore Soundscape, Musical Renaissance of a Global City. Ming Yen is a huge arts advocate, works for a huge organization, and in fact, I was in Malaysia with you, thanks to your invitation, and we got to hang out for just that little time, right? So
Yeah,
Ming Yen, it's
yes,
all
yes.
yours. You've got a fabulous poem, which is a triptych. Go for it.
Okay, thanks, Desmond, and thanks, Eric, for having me on this anthology. Shall I just read the poems first, and then I'll say a bit about them? All right? Is it okay?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. So it's a triptych. There are 3 poems. I'll read them with the titles, and then I'll say a bit about them. Clocks. Movement stopped at 8:15 a.m. Then the children left. A burnt lunchbox, a shadow on stone, a stained dress, a twisted tricycle, and 999 paper cranes folding upon themselves in the black rain. There are always never enough words to name, make visible, or restore. Hair. His touch never reaches the only part they left behind, her hair, always lying there, unmoving and unchanging. His drained fingers, limp from these years of trying, maps exhaustion down the pane of glass, a cold transparent that cuts between them, satisfying history's need of entombing one among the many, transcending death in an exhibit. Always next to him, a visitor whose camera lens is not wide enough to capture lines of auburn, silver, gold, the silent unwriting of an unspoken play. Meme. The meme said our grandparents were asked to fight a war. In September 2020, 3 young girls in the Andaman Islands learned that their 46-year-old father, a construction worker in Singapore, had killed himself in April. And all that was asked of us was to sit on our couches. Their father had been tested for COVID-19. He had no complications from the disease and was on track to be transferred to a community facility. And we could do it. From April to September, more than 300,000 migrant workers have been placed in lockdown as part of the Singapore government's efforts to curb the spread of the disease. But they forgot. While the mental health of the workers remained a concern for many during these months, The Ministry of Manpower reported that it had not noted any spike in the number of migrant worker suicides as compared to previous years. That whether it is a river Kwai or a dormitory block, there are always those longing for home, those waiting at home. The youngest daughter, only 6 years old, was too young to grasp what had happened. A child psychologist told the press that the children will struggle to rationalize with what their father had done even as they grow up, and those who will never return home. Yeah, so that's thanks, Desmond and Eric, for having me on those 3 poems. And so I think what got me about this whole period was actually last year was the 75th anniversary of the end of the Second World War. And this year actually marks the 80th anniversary of the beginning of the Pacific War. And I think it's a strange thing. Some people have compared the situation that we're in now. My mom, who lived through the Second World War, said that this is almost like going through the war all over again. And this something got me thinking. That's very strangely that for those of us who grew up in the 70s, the Second World War was still a very real thing. The memories were still vivid. But as time passes by, I think an entire millennial generation, the Second World War doesn't resonate at all. And so I think I was drawn to certain parallels from what my parents have told me and what we're witnessing now. But also, I think it had a lot to do with things that I'd seen when I visited Hiroshima and Auschwitz, which actually got me thinking. So in Auschwitz itself, and for those of you who may have visited Auschwitz, one of the most striking and one of the most powerful exhibit is actually as you walk down, you would see cases of the shoes, glasses, and luggage bags they left behind. And then the one that's most haunting at the end of the corridor is actually a whole big case of women's hair. Because they remove the hair and they use the hair to actually make knots, and it's I don't know how to describe it. It stuck with me, this whole image of hair, and that's why I came with the poem Hair. And also in Hiroshima, what you see is again all these actual artifacts that are left behind, and again they're by real people, and so I thought that somehow rather just to draw these 2 things together, because I think for me the Second World War was one of the major things in the 20th century that shaped the entire world we know today. The post-colonial world or the post anti-colonial struggles, the entire how what do you call it? What happened in Europe, the division into East and Western Europe and everything. It's the entire world order we live in today is a result of the Second World War and the rise of all the major economic powers like the US and Japan and their presence. It's a result of those. We live still in the legacy, even though it's been more than 70 over years and 80 years now. But the strange thing is we forget. We forget, or at least in certain societies. So I thought it was a good time to kind of remember them. Yeah. So that's how it came about. Yeah.
Yeah, Mingyan, I mean, you have so much experience, being a advocate of culture in Singapore. You've helmed big arts organizations and still are doing. You brought people from other countries here, brought us to other countries. Tell us what is culture's ability or capacity to do the work of healing. We are talking about trauma and healing, and you do a lot of this expansion of our cultural consciousness. I'm sure you've met musicians, artists, writers who deal with healing. What do you feel? Is art the way to go? Does it really do any work for that? What do you think?
Okay, that's a very good thing. I think thanks Desmond. Yeah, you're right. We were together in Ipoh. Am I right?
Yeah.
That was that was in Ipoh. Yeah, that's it. That was great. And well, I think firstly, and also I brought I think artists to Moscow, to South Africa. We did a project there, and to Slovakia, and to Japan, and recently to Delhi. I think, okay, it may sound, people have said it before and all that, but it is true that sometimes, oftentimes, the activities that we broadly call under culture or the arts is something that really bridge people together. And I've seen this happen. I'll tell you a little story that happened last year in India. We were 2 years ago, 2019. We were doing a cross-cultural project in Delhi, and our ground partner there, one of his organizations provided arts education to a group of children who were living in a garbage collection area at just outside Gurgaon. Where they stay isn't even on the map. It's just called Area 52 or something like that. We went there, and it was just, yeah, the parents were waste collectors, and they had to bring children to go in there, teachers to go there, because the parents of these children didn't trust their children leaving that place. So our ground partner sent a teacher in there to teach these children, in language and maths and science and art. They were drawing and painting, and it struck me. It really struck me, and I thought we should do something. And my parent organization, we for the last 15 years, we've been providing free arts education for children from low income families in Singapore, children and youth. So I told I spoke to my colleague who runs a school that we run, and I said, could each of our children write a postcard to each of these children? And there were 30 of them. I got all their names, and I got our beneficiaries who are students to draw a picture, write a postcard, a message to each of these children. So one children to each children, And I brought the postcards over to Delhi, and then a month later, somebody gave me a call and he said, I've got 30 postcards for you from these children to your beneficiaries. And I was just blown over. I didn't expect that. So yeah, simple acts of exchanges connect, people. And I think it's been done throughout all time, that these exchanges of culture, they say something about the way we live, and how we do things. In South Africa, back in 2010, we did a project, and so I worked with the late Iskandar Ismail and Jeremiah and Prof. Prof. Evin Tambu. So we had a South African singer, and then from Singapore we had George Chan, and I wrote a script about Singapore and South Africa, and I used I with Edwin Tambu's permission, I edited his poetry that actually looked at races of community, race, and post-colonialism, to construct that, to find something similar with South Africa. So with the condition of South Africa. So in that sense, yeah, I think music, poetry, somehow or rather, they provide this very simple common ground, maybe because it's just about the way we feel, that connects people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you're a genius. I mean, it's what's amazing about you is, Mingyan, you work with huge organizations, and yet you make it so personal. You don't lose the sense of the personal and how important that is. I mean, those postcards for the kids in India, that's just stunning. That a lot of us forget ourselves once we start doing the humdrum of arts management.
Thanks, Desmond. No, I think we try. I think in almost anything we do, when we call it, we work. Yeah, we have to. I think we should not lose the personal, simple touches in everything we do. That's what keeps us going. That's what makes the difference, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's great that we're ending with Ming Yen because he's not only a genius at cultural linkages, but he's also a champion of the restorative qualities of the arts, not just poetry. And I was in a workshop that he conducted earlier this year. Ming Yen, maybe you can tell us how art, not just poetry, can actually lead to restoration in people.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Eric. Yes, no, thanks for tuning in for the webinar. This is the background. We did a series of webinars on looking at how art can play a healing role, and the one that Eric attended was actually on art and death, art and loss, and the idea of loss. And actually, my organization, we do run a whole series of workshops now. We did it physically, now we do it online. We look at how art can play a role in healing, in the sense that whether just doing something, whether it's visual art or whether it's writing, just that whole idea of expression, of expressing yourself in a way that has perhaps a particular structure. So we work with trainers and artists to guide you in a way where you can actually formulate or create a particular structure for you to express yourself, and from then you find something new. Sometimes some of these structures it may seem common sense to us, but sometimes we forget. And we've found that we do have a regular following. The series is called Rejuvenate. We do have a regular following, and I think from the responses that we have gotten from the audience, especially I think one of you spoke earlier just now about about the current condition that we're going through, this COVID situation. Well, we do have a lot of people finding a need to, I think, express themselves at home. This is an outlet, for whatever they are feeling. So I think in that sense, Eric, you're right. Whether it's drawing, whether it's painting, or just even making music, the idea of an outlet to express yourself, and that mode of expression, whether in whatever art form, helps you create a structure, a form. I think that's a wonderful thing about making art. It forces you to create a particular structure and order for yourself where you feel either safe, comfortable, and finally confident in that only you yourself can have created that structure and that form. And that makes a whole difference to everyone around who is listening, watching, or reading.
Perfect words to end
Yes,
on.
of course.
Perfect words to end on. Making a difference through artistic forms and structures. On that note, we've hit time. Thank you so much, Ming Yen, for being with us. And huge thanks to our 10 wonderful, distinguished, eminent writers, Ao Yong Wai Kit, Christy Ng, Esther Vincent, Claire Batista de Guzman, Ho Kin Yuen, Shilpa Thapliel, Eugenia Tan, Crispin Rodriguez, Mix Bravodet, and Pan Ming Yen. And huge thanks to Poetry on the Move by University of Canberra for giving us the space, darling Kimberly and Sam, for just giving us the deep honor of having our Atelier overseas launch with you. All right. So Eric,
thank you very much. Thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to find expression, as Ming Yen has mentioned, to find a symbolic form for us to communicate something inherently incommunicable.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
Kimberly, yes.
Yeah, it was fabulous. That just was incredible. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay. On that note, everyone, the web anthology, you can see it there. Yes, and it's free access for everyone all over the world. Over 100 contributors have contributed. So please get a sense of poetry of healing and recovery and trauma from these parts of the world. Thank you so much.
Do check out the website.
Yeah, this is incredibly
we can also share
important
that,
work.
right?
Yeah. What?
We can share the poems already.
Yes, the website's live.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's
Thanks,
been
Eric.
Thank you
Thanks,
so
Des.
much. Thank you.